If you're a Cincinnati Bengals fan, you probably had two real hopes heading into the 2020 season. Number two was you wanted to win some games, but you're also very realistic, knowing that Pittsburgh and Baltimore were likely to potentially be playoff teams, and that Cleveland could potentially be improved. So there were those three teams, and then there were the Bengals sitting quite a distance behind. I don't think you were too delusioned to that reality. But number one, and most importantly of all, your focus and what you cared about the most, as you should have, as you absolutely should have, because it was way more important than a few meaningless, not going to get to the damn playoffs anyways wins, was the development of Joe Burrow. You wanted to see him play. You wanted to see him take the field. You wanted to see him show flashes, show development, show progression, show that he could be the guy, the answer at the quarterback position for this kind of woe-begone franchise. And that was it. That's all that mattered this year. That's the only thing you really, truly cared about. Because that's all you had. And that's okay. Especially when you look at how tough the AFC North ended up being with Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Cleveland. You had a 12-win team and two 11-win teams there. There's only but so much that the Bengals were going to be able to do. Let's keep it real. But you had Burrow, so you felt like you had some reason for hope. And I think you could look at Burrow's rookie season, the games that he played, and say that you saw some promise, and you saw progress, and you saw a guy that was at least a credible NFL starting quarterback, and certainly could be a pretty good NFL starting quarterback. Maybe you're a little disheartened when you see just how well Justin Herbert was playing in Los Angeles with the Chargers. But you had nothing to indicate to you that Burrow's a bust. So that's got to be encouraging. You know, just like going into the draft, watching him in the league, it only exacerbated the concerns that I have about his lack of physical talent, specifically his arm strength, and you know what you could actually do with him in a passing game. But you can certainly get by with a quarterback by him at the very least. And if he does everything else at a very, very, very high level, he could be a really damn good quarterback in the league for a really long time to come. And a lot of Bengals fans were seeing that. So obviously, even with your team losing a bunch of games, you still had some hope and some optimism, especially for the future, because you weren't really hearing from much this year. But then you get that devastating leg injury to Joe Burrow in that Washington game. And at that point in time, you're probably just ready for the season to be over. You say, fuck it. Finally got the guy, we think, at the quarterback position, and he can't even make it through the whole season because his damn offensive line can't protect him a lick. And now you got not only questions about, you know, his health for next year, but for going forward. Like, you went from thinking that this was the dude to now you have to start to worry about whether or not he's going to be the same quarterback when he comes back. And hopefully he is. But certainly frustrating if you're a Bengals fan. And, you know, just as you maybe were thinking that, hey, this team could get into a position where they rattle off some wins at the end of the year because you're at the end of Burrow's rookie season and he's grown and progressed. Instead, you had to kind of slog your way through the year. You got that late season victory on Monday night over the Steelers, which is something you could hang your hat on from a team standpoint, but, you know, it still wasn't a very good team, and you didn't get a full season out of Burrow. That's a disappointment. And a lot went wrong with this team, even beyond the Joe Burrow injury, which certainly is the most significant and important thing. You had 8 games offensively where this team scored 20 points or less. That's not going to get it done in today's league. And 4 of them were with Joe Burrow starting. So you can't just hang that all on, let's say, a Ryan Finley or somebody like that. Joe Burrow was part of an offense that certainly struggled at times. They only got 6 games out of Joe Mixon, so you're talking about yet another example of a team that extends a running back's contract, and then that running back struggles to stay healthy. See somebody like a Christian McCaffrey. A.J. Green looked like a shell of his former self. Such a shame, too. Multiple-time Pro Bowler who's been the best player of that franchise for the past decade, and he did. He absolutely looked like a shell of himself. They were 29th in the league in total yards per game, total points scored. So a really, really bad season for them offensively. You combine that with the defense having 6 games where they gave up 30 or more points. They were 26th in total yards allowed, 22nd in total points allowed. You had Carlos Dunlap doing everything he can to eventually work his way out of Cincinnati. The defense also struggled at times very mightily. The reality is is even drafting a Joe Burrow and getting him to play all 16 games, this was still a pretty brutally bad Bengals team. That was a couple years away from you really taking them seriously. So it's not a surprise to see this team got themselves into a position where they're picking 5th overall in this upcoming NFL draft. They earned it. Their defense was bad, and their offense at times was absolutely worse. And when you go into this offseason now and you look at them, you say, okay, what's key? Well, keys. You want Joe Burrow to recover and be healthy and be back in the fold next year. You want Joe Mixon to recover from his injury and be healthy and back in the fold next year. Like, those are the two building blocks that you have on offense. You got to get them back in the fold if you ever really want to do anything. And then you look at them from a salary cap standpoint. They got about $35 million, I think, right now in cap space. It's somewhere between 30 to 40. So they got a little bit of money to spend, not a ton to spend, but I certainly would think they'll either take one or two taxer approaches with that. They will try to improve the offense around Joe Burrow, or they may look to the draft to invest heavily on the offensive side of the ball and then use that money to shore up many of the leaks that they have on the defensive side. And they got a couple of key decisions they got to make on free agents of their own. A.J. Green, after 10 seasons in Cincinnati, was 2020 his swan song? Is he going to go somewhere else, or are they going to bring him back and give him decent money to come back as a potentially diminished player? William Jackson, former first-round pick. Is this a guy that they're going to sink big money into? Probably. Mackenzie Alexander. Are they going to bring him back? So they have a couple of key free agents, but one of the good things when you're not a very good team is you tend to not have a ton of guys they have to pay big money to. So you can keep that cap flexibility for a little bit. And that's what they need to do. Like, try and restrict and control themselves when it comes to the salary cap, because they're still another year or two away before they really want to start diving heavily into that space, especially under Joe Burrow's rookie contract. What they have to do, though, they must do, is they have to do well in this upcoming NFL draft. And I think beyond question, as much as you want to look at that defense and you want to sit there and fix that defense at all three levels, and it needs work, personally, I think you do a better job potentially of fixing that primarily through free agency and maybe some trades. The offense needs to be focused on in the draft. Because you got the young quarterback now. Now you want to build a unit that can be around him for years and grow with him and develop with him for years. You've got to build up that offense around the kid. And it starts with the offensive line. Like, I'm sorry, if you look at that Bengals offensive line, probably 3/5 to 4/5 of that starting offensive line could easily be replaced. Their top two needs to me, flat out, are left tackle and right tackle. You got to get bookend tackles to protect them. And if that means you double dip in rounds 1 and 2 or rounds 1 and 3, then that's what you do. Like, if the Bengals sat there and decided their first 3 rounds of the draft, they went like left tackle, offensive guard, right tackle, I would applaud them for that, because at least they would be understanding the number one key goal of the program is to protect Joe Burrow. That's the number one goal of the program. You have to protect him. And you invest that heavily in the offensive line. If one of them busts out, but the other two don't, then you've still fixed 40% of your offensive line. You must do that. They must invest early, and they must invest often in this offensive line. I also think that they need a better option than Drew Sample at tight end. And, depending upon how the draft plays out, they could potentially address that with a day 2 pick. And I also think wide receiver, like you look at A.J. Green, there might be a chance that he's not back. And you look at what else they have. The kid that they took a few years ago in the first round, John Ross, the dude couldn't even get through his 40 without getting hurt. So everybody always talking about his speed and everything. Like, 1, could he play? The answer is not really. 2, does his speed matter and translate? No, because he's never healthy. He's never on the effing field. So a guy like John Ross, who should be the star wide receiver for this Bengals team, you're looking at, he only played a couple of games this year, again, because he's John Ross, and that's what John Ross does. He most likely won't be back. A.J. Green might be gone. So you're going to sit there and just roll out there with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd? No, you probably need to get another outside wide receiver. So you're looking somewhere in what shapes up to be a pretty good offensive class in general, but specifically at wide receiver, wanting to address that position somewhere between rounds 2 through 4, and maybe even, depending upon who's available, it's round 1, and that could certainly be the case as well. I think the fortunate thing for the Bengals here is when you look at their team needs and where this draft in a few months his strongest. Strength of the draft matches his team's needs. Offensive tackle, wide receiver, maybe tight end. So the Bengals are in a pretty good position here. They're in a pretty good spot. Now, what they end up doing with that remains to be seen. I think a lot of Bengals fans and a lot of media you've seen have probably tabbed the Sewell kid from Oregon, since he's an offensive lineman projected to be a left tackle to go 5th overall. I may have some questions about whether or not he actually can stick outside at tackle or if he's more of a guard, which may hurt his draft stock a little bit. But for all intents and purposes, if you look at what the Bengals should be doing right now, especially with that first round pick at pick 5, you don't get cute. If somebody comes calling because they want to trade up and get a quarterback and you decide yourself that you don't want to take the quarterback, which I don't think is right for them to do right now, I could make an argument for it. If somebody gives you a king's ransom to move up to the 5th pick, then you move back and you figure it out from there. Otherwise, if you end up staying put at the 5th pick, then you take the best player available, whether it's an offensive lineman or a wide receiver. It's that simple. We'll see what happens with the Bengals this offseason. It was a season that started with some hope for Bengals fans, even if it wasn't about wins and losses. And unfortunately, it feels like you're just repeating the Bengals cycle all over again.